Back to the top story, the ongoing COP28 in Dubai. Joining me are two very special guests, Dr. Mohan Kumar and Mr. Ashish Chaturvedi. Dr. Kumar is a former Indian ambassador to France and Bahrain. He joins us from the New Delhi suburb of Greater Noida. Mr. Chaturvedi is the head of action for climate and environment at UNDP India. He joins us from New Delhi. Gentlemen, welcome to DD India News Hour. Ambassador Kumar, if I can start with you. Are you satisfied with how COP28 is shaping up so far from India's perspective?
I think it's a little too early to say, Ramesh. Thank you for having me. But so far, I would say so good. At least established the operational framework for the loss and damage fund. And I think there is a realization that countries are falling behind. That is what the first global stocktake is going to say.
Right.
Ever since Paris happened, Ramesh, your viewers should know that until the Paris COP happened, leaders came only towards the end of the COP conference. It was Paris for the first time that the French reversed the order. And they said, let the leaders come in the beginning of the COP summit, encourage the chief negotiators to do their best, and then get out of the way so that negotiators can then burn the midnight oil and try to arrive at a consensus. So I would say so far, so good. I wanted to, if you give me 1 minute, I wanted to emphasize the strong message. The strong message by PM is implicit, actually pointing a finger at the developed countries and telling them that the global carbon budget is no longer enough for the developing countries, and the developing countries must get a fair share of the global carbon budget. And the second point that the PM made is equally valid. All the issues on the table should get equal treatment, and we must move in a balanced manner. He had in mind adaptation, mitigation. He had in mind finance, technology, and loss and damage. Because what you see from the developed countries so far is just an emphasis on mitigation, mitigation, and mitigation. In fact, the financial transfer meant for adaptation has actually fallen for the first time in the last 2 years. So I thought the PM's message was pertinent, and I hope it is received in the right quarters in the spirit in which it was made, because the developed countries and China have a lot of responsibility to fulfill in this COP summit if the COP outcome is to be seen as being credible.
Indeed. Mr. Chaturvedi, a consensus on day one of the summit on loss and damage fund. A good start, you think?
Absolutely. I think it's a great beginning. And what I believe is kind of a landmark moment as far as thinking about non-mitigation funding is concerned. There have been commitments made already. So Germany is putting in $100 million. The UAE is putting in $100 million as well. Of course, the gap is still going to be massive. The order of magnitude of funding which is required to cover loss and damage is in, well, sort of orders of billions, if not trillions. So the commitments that have been made thus far is of course a good beginning, but I think there are lots of loose ends which need to be tied up as well. But I think it's well begun. And the fact that, well, sort of other than adaptation, loss and damage has, of course, not gotten any resources thus far. So as compared to mitigation, which gets the lion's share of the resources in climate finance, adaptation hasn't received as much resources. And of course, now loss and damage is finally getting some kind of recognition. But I think we also need to be aware that this is part of sort of climate diplomacy. So this is just the first day of the COP. And we have to be really watchful over the next few days as the different events unfold, where we'll be talking about the global stocktake. We'll, of course, be looking at the new goal on climate finance. and of course issues around transparency, Article 6, which is about carbon markets. I think those issues will be up for discussion as well. And needless to say, the global goal on adaptation as well, which still has to be closed.
Ambassador Kumar, you referred to Prime Minister Modi's interventions at COP28. One big outcome or takeaway from one of his interventions on Friday at COP28 in Dubai was India's proposal to host COP33 in 2028. You think it's a good idea to showcase India's green credentials, number one, and number two, to leverage or build on India's consensus building image that's been built in view of the G20 summit that was hosted in New Delhi recently?
Absolutely, Ramesh. There's no question, especially after the resounding success of the G20 summit, which was held in Delhi recently, and India managed to bring together different parties. The way I see it, it's not just showcasing India's green credentials, although that is an important point. I think the second more important point for me is India's agency and ability to act as a bridge between the North and the South, and to be the voice of the global South. I think these two considerations are predominant and extremely important in India offering itself as a host for COP33. I will have you know that it is not as if countries are desperately queuing up to host the COP summit, because the COP summit by definition is a difficult summit. Getting consensus among 200 countries is no joke. So if India has done it, it shows two things: that India, number one, is confident now of acting as a bridge after the G20 summit. And secondly, India feels that this is conference diplomacy in which India can put forward the points of view of the global South and act as a bridge and achieve consensus, which is also part of the transition that India is making from being a rule taker to a rule shaper. And I see this as a big moment, actually, in India's diplomacy.
Absolutely. What Ambassador Kumar says gives me a perfect segue to my next question to you, Mr. Chaturvedi. We've seen India and France come together for the Solar Alliance a few years ago, and now we're seeing the Lead IT or Industry Transformation 2.0 along with Sweden. Is a good example of North-South cooperation, which Ambassador Kumar was referring to?
Yeah, well, Lead IT was actually launched at the climate summit, which was organized by the UN Secretary General around the Paris summit. And of course,
I'm told these are the visuals coming to you from Dubai.